Hello and good morning. Change now! Can I get your round of applause here? Welcome to the Agora stage. Lovely to see you all. Yes, we are in a little bit of a noise competition here. So I want to win this competition with all your applause. Thank you so much for being here, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a pleasure to be here on Change Now. And it's great, of course, to see you all. It's always a very special environment to be surrounded by so many of you, so many of amazing change makers from all over the world. This really gives hope in these stormy times. My name is Katie Gallus. I'm an international independent moderator, and I will be your host for the upcoming 90 minutes. And as you all know, we have a lot of different political debates when it comes to solutions, when it comes to climate change solutions. The question really is, how are we debating these topics? So often these topics, these questions, these perspectives are debated within silos. Yet often in these conversations, it is claimed how to break these silos. And this is really why we are here for. We'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the question, how to break these silos when it comes to biodiversity, to desertification and to climate, but also what it means to include communities, to include the business sector, and to include different finance flows when the silos are finally connected. And so with that, I welcome you all to our session. You know the numbers very well. By 2030, we must cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 43% compared to the 2019 levels. We must conserve 30% of land, of water, of seas, and we need to restore 1.5 billion hectares of degraded land by 2030. So we know our tasks, and we also know that it is increasingly clear that this cannot happen in silos. Everything is connected and everything is interconnected, and restoration cannot be treated in isolation. And then, ladies and gentlemen, you know you have it all in your calendars, right? We have a triple COP year again. 2026, it's a very special year. We have the Biodiversity COP in Armenia. We have the Desertification COP in Mongolia. And of course, we have the Climate COP coming up in November, then back in Turkey. And all these COPs, as I mentioned, they are interrelated, but also, of course, as everything is interconnected, we need to understand a little bit more how to break the silos and how to work forward in the pathways when it comes to science, policy, and funding coherence. And you see the title. Our title of the next 90 minutes is about the Rio Trio Synergies to restore land, climate, and biodiversity. And with that, I welcome you once again, and I would say we are ready to kick this off. Let's dive into our session. And I welcome now in a second our keynote speaker. She's a global environmentalist. She's a CEO and founder at the Green Generation Initiatives. She's a young African climate leader. She's a commissioner at Global Commission on the Economics of Water. She's a Time Impact Award winner. And before she's coming on stage, she sent us a video because we need to understand a little bit more what keeps her busy day in and day out. So please also give her a round of applause. Elizabeth Wathuti, but we start with a video. Elizabeth.
Climate change is no longer a distant threat. It is here, in the landscapes around us. In hills once covered with trees, now left bare, in rivers that no longer flow as they used to, in communities feeling the strain every day. But within this challenge lies an opportunity to restore, to rebuild, and to rethink how we live with nature. At Green Generation Initiative, we are restoring ecosystems and empowering communities through nature-based solutions. In schools, we are doing more than just planting trees. We are teaching the young people how to grow and take care for them, turning school compounds into greener, cooler, and more productive spaces. Beyond schools, we work alongside farmers and communities to restore degraded land, supporting them to grow food and rebuild the health of their soil. Across landscapes, from forests to water catchments, we are protecting the natural systems that sustain everyday life. And along the coast, we are working with women and young people to restore ecosystems and rebuild livelihoods. Beyond our borders, across Africa, we are equipping young leaders with the knowledge, skills, platforms, and funding to scale their innovations and drive climate action for today and tomorrow. Climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is a food issue, water issue, and a livelihood issue. That is why we invest in people. Each tree we plant is not just an act of restoration. It is a commitment to resilient ecosystems, food security, and a future where people and nature thrive together. Impact is therefore not measured by the number of trees planted, but by the number that grow, thrive, and sustain life. Together, we are restoring landscapes, strengthening communities, and growing a greener, more resilient future.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to begin my remarks with an aspect of what I would love for you to live with by the end of my keynote today. And I hope you live with one clear conviction that restoring land, climate, and biodiversity together is the most practical and effective path that we have if we truly want to deliver impact at scale. And the video you've just watched is a practical example of how all of these aspects work together in reality, on the ground, at the community level, and out there in nature. My name is Elizabeth Wathuti. I am the founder and the CEO of the Green Generation Initiative. And at the Green Generation Initiative, our work goes beyond implementing climate solutions on the ground and also restoring the degraded water catchment areas to also understanding what it takes to scale these solutions across Africa and globally, while also showcasing their impact, especially the ones that just fix nature as a whole. And let's take a moment to reflect on where we stand today. One is that across the globe, more than 40% of land is degraded. And the second aspect is that more than 40% of the global GDP is generated by sectors that depend on nature. And this includes fisheries, it includes agriculture, meaning that without healthy natural ecosystems, these sectors cannot function, and they cannot also be socially and economically viable. At the same time, as a globe, we have committed ourselves rightly to three major global agendas. We have the Paris Agreement on climate change, we have the Global Biodiversity Framework, and we also have the UN Convention to combat desertification. And may I also add the 30 by 30 target to protect at least 30% of land and water by 2030. Now, each of these frameworks is necessary, and each of them is backed by science, and each of them has got clear targets that we must meet. But here's the challenge. We're implementing them in ways that do not reflect how nature actually works in reality. Because land, climate, and biodiversity are not separate systems. They are interconnected systems. Now, what happens on land affects water systems, it affects the marine ecosystems, affects biodiversity, affects livelihoods, and climate at the same time. A good example is a restored landscape, as you've seen in the video that you've just watched. A restored landscape does not choose whether it's contributing to carbon sequestration, biodiversity, species recovery, or soil regeneration. It does all of them simultaneously. So then the question is, why are we still solving them separately if nature has shown us how interconnected they are? I'd like to share 3 perspectives from experience on how we can change these. The first is that integrated land restoration can be delivered credibly if it employs a triple bottom line approach of people, planet, and prosperity. And the second is that for the Rio Trio Synergies to work, we must move away from isolated approaches and apply the 4 principles of sustainability in every solution. And that is ecological integrity, social equity, economic efficiency, and also intergenerational equity. For instance, while we're doing conservation, we cannot say that we have so much money to conserve the mountain bongos while there is no money within that same conservation funding to provide the basic essentials like schools or hospitals, or to address poverty, or to even finance community-led restoration for the same communities that are expected to coexist with these mountain bongos. Because without communities, conservation cannot succeed. At some point, the survival of this community is going to outweigh conservation. Now, that aspect is understanding that a generation restoration mindset is not built through narratives that people cannot relate to. It is earned when people see value by showcasing what is already working. At the Green Generation Initiative, our work has been shaped by a holistic understanding of these 3 perspectives that I have just mentioned. And our major integrated land restoration project is the water fund model, which we are implementing across key water catchment areas, working with communities, with farmers, with water utility companies, with the private sector, and even with the government agencies collectively. Now, how this water fund model works is through a structured financial mechanism that supports the upstream communities in conserving and restoring the degraded ecosystems, while the downstream users, and that includes the cities, the communities down there, the water utility companies that are tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that the people in the cities have water, they now benefit from improved water security. This model aligns the catchment restoration aspect with economic incentives, collaboration across the different stakeholders that I've mentioned, and the payment of ecosystem services for the communities that are doing this work each and every day. And to date, with a growing network of more than 200,000 farmers, more than 4.8 million seedlings have been grown to support watershed restoration. And we also have over 206,000 hectares of farmland that are under improved soil and water management practices. We are also seeing an 18% increase in water yields from the watersheds, which tells you that if you have a holistic approach of how we address restoration and how we address biodiversity and land conservation, then we get multiple results at the same time. Now, what this water funds model results shows us is something really important, that when these interventions that we make across the world are designed around ecosystems, the Rio Trio Synergies, and around people, then they deliver multiple outcomes all at once. So we have different aspects that we can see in terms of results. Carbon is sequestered. We have soil being restored. Biodiversity begins to recover at the same time. And science-based stewardship is also propagated. We also begin to see communities building their own resilience to the climate crisis through the improved livelihoods. And lastly, now, the generation restoration mindset that we are talking about among communities begins to become a choice. It is not something that you have to impose upon them. It is something that now they begin to live by each and every day. And yet, despite this, our global systems are not designed to support such integrated approaches at scale. In fact, what we are seeing every day is that projects that deliver across climate, biodiversity, and land restoration, they often struggle to access funding simply because they do not fit into one single category. So the question is, if nature is integrated, then why are our solutions not integrated? So as I conclude, let me share the example of one of the water fund projects that has really demonstrated huge impacts. Through the Africa's First Water Fund, which we are implementing with partners, we have over the years worked with different communities to restore water catchment areas while supporting the communities through the incentivization of the fruit trees that give them a commercial value. Because for the communities to engage in restoration, we must look at how they prosper in the process. We cannot expect them to engage and be part of restoration if we are not paying for the ecosystem services that is also going to help them improve their lives, and this is where the incentivization model comes in. So over time with this model, something powerful has just happened. One is that the communities are now actively protecting the springs and the wetlands, and they're doing it one spring at a time, one wetland at a time, because they have seen what could change if they put their hands together to restore what has been lost before. We are also beginning to see the return of species that support the habitat of the mountain bongo. Now, for those who are not familiar with the mountain bongos, these are critically endangered antelope that is only found in the alpine forests of Kenya. Mountain bongos are a reflection of a healthy water catchment, something that the local communities know of and have known of for a very long time through also their own local language. Now, these forests are not only important for local livelihoods, but they are also critical water catchment landscapes for Kenya, known as the water towers of Kenya. And more importantly, we're beginning to see communities now no longer relying on bushmeat because they have improved their livelihoods, particularly from the avocado farming that is providing sustainable alternatives for them, because they not only benefit from these avocados locally, but they can also be able to export and generate revenue that can help them meet other costs each and every day. So this is a clear example of what an integrated Rio Trio land restoration practice can achieve. And this is the approach I believe our models need to adopt, and this is the model that we must scale. If nature has shown us that all these three are interconnected, then our solutions must also continue to demonstrate that connection, and the systems that exist in the world must also listen to nature in the same way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Another round of applause for the rock star, Elizabeth Wathuti. Beautiful. I think we're going to rearrange the stage quickly, but I, of course, will give you a glimpse of what's coming up then in our session. We are here to discuss the 3 different environmental frameworks that were created at the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. And my panel guests, of course, they are all experts in the field. They have tremendous experience working within the frameworks of climate change, of biodiversity and desertification. Of course, the world has changed quite a bit since 1992, and this is also, of course, a good thing. But especially in these geopolitical storms that we are facing today, when public funds are scarce and under threat, when multilateralism is getting eroded and the multilateral framework is a bit shaky, to say at least, we need to elaborate a little bit more on that, and we want to better understand how must be the system redesigned for building up resilience, and what are pathways for cooperation and for mind shift towards what Elizabeth just mentioned, towards a generation restoration in science, policy, in the corporate sector, and the collaboration, and of course in the funding coherence. So please, my distinguished panel guests, join me here on stage, and I will do a proper introduction when we are seated. Your Excellencies. Voilà, ici, d'accord, merci. Beautiful. I'd like to give you a proper introduction, of course, before we are diving into our conversation. Next to me seated is the Vice Minister of Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, joining us from Mongolia, His Excellency Mukhtamir Batbaya. Also a round of applause. Seated in the center position here, Monsieur Laurent Fabius, President of COP21, former Prime Minister of France, but also leading the Circles of Presidents for COP30 in Belém, a group bringing together the COP presidents. Monsieur Fabius, thank you, merci. And last but not least, Your Excellency, Mr. Merch Magarian, Ambassador and Special Envoy for the COP17, and he's the Armenian Chief Negotiator from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Armenia. Monsieur Fabius, I'd like to start with you because when we're looking, of course, in your CV, you were playing a pivotal role when it comes to the Paris Agreement, creating a unifying global climate framework, and today we are facing parallel frameworks on biodiversity and land degradation. So in this new world order, and I mentioned as well the multilateralism and the multilateral frameworks are a bit shaky right now. Where do you see the gaps for concrete governance or finance mechanisms that are still missing today for combining the three agendas? It's a big question right at the beginning.
Yeah, it's not easy. Well, first, I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues and with all of you, and you will forgive my pidgin English. Yes, well, I have chaired the COP21, which is supposed to be the best one, the Paris Agreement, and the context was quite different. When I'm asked about the secrets of the success, I usually answer that the secret is the 3 S: science, society, and states. At that time, it was 2015. Science was not criticized as much as today. Society, there was rather large support among companies, among people, among NGOs, and so on and so forth, in favor of fight against climate change. And states, because at that time, it was not this turmoil as today. These 3 S, unfortunately, have either disappeared or they are attacked. Science is attacked, society, you have the backlash, and I'm not speaking very long about the international turmoil. Therefore, these 3 S must be replaced by something else. Mm-hmm. We have tried to do that in the field of fight against climate change with the Belém COP, and we shall keep on, I hope so, in Turkey and then in the various COPs. But, and it comes to our topic. 10 years ago, we were not thinking about the relationship between climate, land, and biodiversity, let's be honest. Okay. But step by step, we became aware that everything is linked. And therefore, I think today, with my own experience, being both ambitious and realistic, that we have to adapt our governance in the field of the different COPs. And I'm quite ready in 3 minutes to explain with my own experience what can be the changes for the next governance.
This is a perfect cliffhanger for a second question to you in just a minute about how the structures need to be redesigned. Monsieur Fabius, thank you for that start. I'd like to come back to Your Excellency Badbaya. Of course, I mentioned earlier this big number. It is all needed. The goal is clear, restoring 1.5 billion hectares of degraded land by 2030. And of course, with the COP happening in Mongolia right now, the COP17, it's all framed with the topic of restoring land and restoring hope when we follow along, of course, of your perspective. So give us a little bit of a glimpse of the Mongolian perspective. What gives you then the confidence that this COP will change and can move from commitments to really large-scale action when we need these big numbers to tackle?
Thank you. Thank you for calling out. Well, Of course, the COP is, the COP17 is, it's not only a conference. It is a platform for all the stakeholders to engage, the governments, private sectors, investors, and the local communities to engage with the delivery. And the successful COP for us in Mongolia, first of all, we were talking about the multilateral agreements within the topics that needs to be done. The using geopolitical position of Mongolia to having the diplomacy to negotiate with the come up with the common agreement is one of the main goals. And out of the COP, we're going to launch this opportunity for all these stakeholders to bring out with the step action agenda that we call it. And under the step action agenda, we are introducing the 3 initiatives, which will be the rangeland flagships and water nexus management, and most importantly, nature-based solutions. So, we are all combining together to setting up the hosting all these COP. The COP17 for the UNCCD is the first COP of this year to determine the next 2 COPs, where it's going to happen, the CBD in Armenia and in CCC in Turkey. So it is very important for us. Yeah.
You mentioned restoring land, of course, also restoring hope. What gives you hope? Because Monsieur Fabius mentioned it is a geopolitical turmoil that we are all working in. What gives you hope then?
Right, the land is, within these initiatives, the first one, the highlighted initiative that we call it the rangeland flagship. So out of Mongolia, the 70% of the Mongolia is rangeland. So, it contains, when we talk about the land, it cannot be only, determined to the UNCCD. It can be linked to the CBD and, biological diversity is also in the climate change, right? And so therefore, restoring land is a social, economic, environmental issue. So that's why we believe that restoring land is the base of the restoring hope, as it is all environmental issue. So, we have to start thinking of restoring the hope. There is a saying, land as soil. If there is no land and soil, there's no food. There's gonna be no food.
And no life then.
So without food, no life of human being or the life of the animals and stuff. So it linked everything. I think we call it the restoring land is base of all the environmental issues. So once you put investment in the land, we'll restore this hope of having our earth together.
Thank you.
Living. Thank you.
I mean, you already mentioned the Biodiversity COP as well. So we are, of course, coming to you. We would love to understand a little bit more when we talk about breaking the gaps, breaking the silos. How do we elevate the knowledge about biodiversity? How to close the gap from your perspective between climate, land, and biodiversity? And of course, how would you like to bring it all together then in Armenia, which makes it maybe different from Kali last year?
Thank you. Yes, it is indeed a pleasure and honor for me to join this year's Change Now event dedicated to climate, biodiversity, and land restoration. And I'm very happy to share this stage with prominent people. I appreciate also the opportunity to reflect on Armenia's perspective as the incoming presidency of Biodiversity COP17. So we have 2 COP17s. One is biodiversity and one on the desertification. And indeed, there is a greater need to elevate knowledge about biodiversity and the interlinkages between 3 Rio Conventions. Biodiversity, as is known, is the living fabric of our planet. It underpins human well-being of the present as well as the future generations. And its rapid decline threatens nature and people alike. And it is vital to transform people's actions and relationship with biodiversity to halt and reverse its decline. Hence comes the Armenian presidency's COP17 motto, which is taking action for nature. So biodiversity carries profound ecological, economic, and cultural importance. It underpins agriculture, water resources, disaster resilience, and rural development. it also shapes cultural heritage and daily life in many countries, including in Armenia, in ways that are often underestimated. And to elevate the political will and the awareness at the highest level and to hold biodiversity laws and protect ecosystems, the Armenian presidency is planning to host a leaders summit right before COP17 itself to bring together heads of state and government, globally recognized scientists, prominent cultural figures, celebrities who champion environmental causes. And this summit will aim to serve as a political anchor for COP17, setting the tone for an ambitious, solutions-driven conference and offer a platform for a unified global message to safeguard future of life on Earth. So COP17 is not just another meeting for us, it's a milestone also on the road to 2030. If you allow, it's a moment of truth for the implementation.
I'd like to come in with what Elizabeth was mentioning, because she mentioned we need a mindset, and this means, of course, we need communities also involved in the COPs. How would you like to include the society, the communal level in your COP? Maybe you can give us a glimpse, because to redesign a system, we need people. And we need to understand a little bit more what makes then the muscle of the community stronger. What's your take on that?
Yes, absolutely. Our presidency will place strong emphasis on stakeholder engagement and inclusion and on the human dimension of the biodiversity policy. So this includes strengthening the participation of women and youth and local actors, indigenous peoples, representative of local communities in the decision-making processes, and creating also meaningful opportunities for academic institutions, for private sector partners, and subnational authorities to contribute to the implementation of it. So we aim to ensure that COP17 serves as a platform for practical and solution-oriented exchange among all stakeholders. So the conference will not only drive the formal negotiation process, which is important, that we need to mobilize all the constructive positions of the member states to arrive into the consensual outcomes. But it will also showcase good practices, partnership models, and tools that are already making a difference across the world.
Mm-hmm. What does collective action mean for you to bring, of course, global goals down to a national level, to the Mongolian perspective? Also, of course, NDCs, we are all aware of that, but what do you actually do to bring the topics of land into the Mongolian national perspective?
Well, definitely. Well, you know, since we're talking about the COP17, you know, it's same as CBD, you know, COP17. So I'll talk about COP17 for UNCCT. So for Mongolia is, you know, the effective collective action means, you know, restoration. It's not a standalone project, right? Restoration for the land. And then it means, you know, bringing all these stakeholders, same as CBD, you know, stakeholders together for a common framework that positive outcome and delivery of the projects, the concepts. And therefore, you know, it will require the involvement of all these private sectors and, you know, NGOs, governments, you know, local communities for the shared deliveries that we are expecting. And, you know, the one investment should, you know, within this case, you know, all these stakeholders, the one investment should deliver the multiple outcomes. That's how we see these collective action means, you know, for within the COP17 of UNCCT. And then, you know, there are some gaps, you know, the biggest gaps that, you know, lack of coordination between the priorities and institutional capacity and the finance. So the political involvement in this area is still growing, but on the other hand, it needs to be matched by the stronger delivery mechanism and better alignment between the global ambition and the national implementation strategy.
What do you mean by that when it comes to the finance flows, you know? Because at the end I mentioned the public money can be scarce right now.
Right,
so what do you see, where is the lever for finance flows that are combining then land, biodiversity and climate?
Right, so on the other hand, you know, whoever in speaking of the general words, whoever is interested in to bring it up is the investors or whatever it is. The government's supposed to give them the environment of reduced risk to having the framework, institutional work, put it in the work. So this is how we need to see hold the conference itself.
We're coming to the finance flow back into a second. With you, Fabius, I'd like to go a little bit step back because, of course, when it comes to the mindset that we were also debating, the mindset of the generation restoration, how can governments be incentivized but also held accountable to prioritize these long-term land and ecosystem stewardship forward? What is your experience on that? Because the global level is one thing, but the other thing is also, of course, when we look into the national level, what do you then see as a main to-do?
Well, there is no secret. There is what one called national sovereignty. On the one hand, it's an excellent thing. On the other hand, it means that governments are free to act or not to act. Okay, but my point, and maybe if you agree, I could come back on that, is how can we reform the global governance in order to, not to force, but to encourage governments and society to integrate the three big ones.
What's your take? Let's dive in. Shall we merge the COPs? What do you need by governance? We are curious.
Okay, and I must say, before making some proposals, that I'm both voluntary and realistic. Okay. COPs are not perfect, that's clear, but they're useful. Okay. Therefore, it's a sort of mixed bag, and it would be a mistake to cancel them or to change them into a sort of permanent discussion without implementation. Okay. This being said, there are some elements which now are sure. It is scientifically clear that climate, biodiversity, and land cannot be separated. It is this, your point, okay. They cannot be separated, but they can be contradictory. We must not forget that. And if we address one without the others, it is no longer sufficient. When I'm looking back to the previous time, there has been a period of time in which every COP was completely separated. Now it's beginning to change, and this year we shall have the 3 COPs. Okay. Therefore, I can imagine a sort of 3-tier system. First, in our different COPs, we have to integrate as much as possible the other COPs. When you will define your ordre du jour and yourself, and it is the same for climate, you have not to forget the other 2. That's one point. And it's already the case. I've seen that in Belém. The Brazilian COP has been criticized, okay? But it was more open than before. Therefore, the first tier is to have COPs which are open to the other one. Second, the big question, shall we have to have a unique COP? My answer is no, I'm clear. Because it's too complex, because it will be a mess, because the legal bases are different. Therefore, I answer no. But I may imagine in 2030, 4 years, to have, and afterwards every 4 years, a super COP. The 3 of us. And it is not enough because COP is not enough, and you have to check permanently what are the results, what are what we call in climate NDCs, what are the problems, the relationship with all that and financing and so on and so forth. And therefore, it's the reason why I imagine to have attached to the General Assembly of UN a Climate and Nature Council. What could it be? Our Brazilian friends have proposed, they have studied a climate council attached to the General Assembly. Why? Because the usual spoilers, and there are new spoilers, they cannot paralyze the system in the General Assembly. They can do it in the Security Council, but not in General Assembly.
Monsieur,
And this Climate and Nature Council will examine and follow up the financial question, the relationship with all that, with the scientific points, and therefore, and maybe also, I have no time to explain
this is a whole
that,
other keynote here, Monsieur Fabius.
that
Yeah.
this council could could deal with the emergency situations, because there is nobody in the UN system which deal with that. And therefore, having a permanent follow-up of the system, gathering the different aspects and the different scopes, and following the implementation of the system, it could be a new tier and a usual tier.
Thank you, Monsieur Fabius, because it's very precise with concrete ideas. And I remember we are often having this debate. I think all the change nows, they are asking the questions, oh, should we merge the COPs? Yes or no? And you gave us a clear idea. And to wrap it a little bit up, of course, you were nodding and you were taking notes quite heavily. So what is maybe a question mark to what Monsieur Fabius just mentioned for you? And of course, when it comes to the Biodiversity COP, or would you agree, is that a way forward? Because the times are changing. It's not 1992 anymore, right? And of course, we would be also very curious what you are saying, and maybe what you are planning to be debating at during the COP, during your COP.
Yes, indeed. I was taking careful notes of Mr. Fabius's suggestions and proposals. It would be a fantastic idea to deliberate the possibility of having a super COP, or indeed to have an adjacent body to the General Assembly. It's something that needs to be carefully and seriously considered. And about the coherence across Rio conventions, indeed it's high time to have a synergy. And we all know that with climate, biodiversity, and the land restoration targets, they are converging in 2030. And our COP17, we see it as helping reinforce synergies across policy, finance, and technical dimensions, so that the countries can act more effectively and more efficiently. Climate change is among the primary drivers of the biodiversity loss. And in reverse, also biodiversity conservation can contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation. So understanding the interplay between these processes, between climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation is critical for the implementation of effective and lasting solutions to climate change, and for maintaining biodiversity and nature's contribution to people. And indeed, there is also a need to strengthen the continuity between COPs, as Mr. Fabius was mentioning earlier, between the three COPs. And our presidency will looking into these opportunities and try to do the efforts to make sure that it happens.
Thank you. Your Excellency, I have two questions for you. First of all, what was a question mark for you when we were listening to Monsieur Fabius' ideas, and of course very precise ideas of how to build a system, not just an idea, how to build a system and a structure?
Well, I really like the idea. I mean, I'm totally agree with the total, the background of all these COPs linked each other. So there is question from Elizabeth, as she was mentioning in the opening remarks, that the linking of all these three COPs are logical, but as he mentioned, it's really hard to separate them. It's really hard to merge them as one super COP. But idea to having the super COP and every 4 years would be really, it might be a really good idea to try it out. But in my words, I think just to break the silos between all these conventions, we got to be stop treating them as a different agenda. So this is why the step action agenda for the COP17 UN CCT is for the land. So land is where all these priorities meet, And then, we will definitely connect them with the integrated outcomes for the financial mechanism to implement it in all these three areas of the convention, and where, land will be initiated all the time with CBD and CCT, and also the CCT. There's always going to be a land. So that's why the COP for the Mongolian slogans would be restoring the land and restoring the hope, to connecting up all these conventions.
What would be your message? Because we have a lot of business people in the room as well, and business people are always interested in business cases. When it comes to restoration and creating that mindset of restoration, what would be your message to the business experts here in the field and in the room?
Right. My message to the private sector is that, we're still talking about the land, that land restoration is not only private owners or it's a side activity, as it can be a linkage of all these three conventions. And also, take it as the long-term risk management and sustainable growth. So, in UN CCT research, that every $1 investment in land can generate the $30 return in advance for the benefit. So I would like to encourage that out of all these private sectors investors to invest in the land to restore a hub. There is a saying, out of restoration finance, there's only 6% investment from the private sectors. Yeah, I would like to encourage everyone in the private sectors and to come out and invest in the land to restore a hub. And I would like to invite you all to the COP17 for Mongolia to explore a beautiful country of mine in August 17, and we're going to be a first COP of this year to determine the next two COPs. So it will be a good start for Mongolians and opportunities for globally every sector's welcome to Mongolia. Thank you.
Thank you. We have, of course, COP17, the Biodiversity COP from October 19 until the 30th. And we have the Climate COP in Turkey from November 9th until 20th. I only had 26 minutes with you, but I could go on and on and on with you. And we need a keynote from you and your very precise ideas next year on Change Now, to the organizers of Change Now. That would be amazing. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, for this wonderful conversation. To His Excellency Mr. Mert Magarian, to His Excellency Mukhtamir Badbaya, and of course to Monsieur Laurent Fabius. Merci beaucoup. This is your round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And merci mille fois. Merci, merci. Bonne journée. And thank you very much. And I'll see you backstage. And on my fireside chat now, when we are diving a little bit more into some keywords, we talked a lot about the business sector, the private sector, the community building, because this is also what Elizabeth was mentioning. So we are actually having the conversation now again a little bit more community-centered as well, because we reflect on some points now in our big topic, how to create the synergies between land, between biodiversity and climate. Tim and Laurent, don't leave me alone here on stage, please. A round of applause to Tim Christopherson and Laurent Kaiser. Hi, lovely to see you. For the camera, yeah, thank you. Let's dive in. I give the audience a quick introduction. With me, ladies and gentlemen, is Tim Christopherson. He is currently the Vice President for Climate Action at Salesforce. He's a leading global voice on ecosystem restoration with over 25 years of experience in climate and biodiversity advocacy. So I could go on and on and on in his CV. I shorten it up. He's also the author of, and you brought it here, of the book Generation Restoration, which is a roadmap for restoring nature at planetary scales, and his career also includes the International Union for Conservation of Nature and 15 years as a diplomat with the United Nations Environment Programme. And then he joined the private sector. So, you know, he has quite some hats on. And of course, we are so happy to have you with us. Thank you, Tim. Next to Tim, Laurent Kaiser. And when I met him the first time, I was already amazed by his spirit. He's truly on a mission to demonstrate that the restoration of our planet must emerge from the communities who steward their lands, really going forward in that regard. And he's the CEO of Global Forest Generation and the co-founder of Acción Andina. We'd like to hear more about that in a second as well. He works alongside indigenous and local leaders to restore high Andean ecosystems critical for water security, biodiversity, and cultural continuity. And he received the 2023 Earthshot Prize. So please, again, wake up and give them a round of applause, because we are here at Change Now. And I'd like to start our conversation because, as I mentioned, both of you have been deeply involved in shaping the movement when it comes to creating this mindset. But sometimes we miss some ideas about restoration, or some beliefs are still present that are not realistic. So, Flora, I'd like to start with you. What is a belief that maybe we hold today about restoration that you feel the world is not yet fully understanding, or that the world is misunderstanding, or the world is ignoring?
Hi. Well, good morning still. It's an honor, and thank you for joining you here on this panel and to Change Now. That's a great question. I think we need to not make the mistake of confusing a business agenda, let's say, business in a broad sense, around restoration and conservation with a broader societal movement. They're intrinsically linked, right? And each side of the spectrum develops amazing innovations for it. But I think as at the moment, the last few years was a little bit at the global stage, things were going in a very different direction compared to the optimism we felt 10, 11 years ago. But on the ground, when you have communities in the millions coming together and really planting trees, restoring forests, fighting for river, fighting for rights of nature, this is what a true, to me at least personally, I'm tremendously honored to be on the ground every single day. This is where the real things happen. Now, our big task is to bring these two movements together, where we benefit from amazing innovation in the private sector with new technologies and so on. But the fundamental work is really happening deep down in the communities at the cultural level. And this is where we have a task to work together at a much greater scale.
Tim, in your book you mentioned, or you are calling for a new kind of global ecological literacy. And you also explore a little bit how we can reset our relationship with nature, which also brings the community level, what Florent was mentioning. So we should understand ourselves as an integral part of it, with nature, rather than just apart from it. But what is your take on it? How can we reach the individual person to create that mindset, to stand up for the values? How can we empower these communities to bridge the gaps and to then reach, of course, these global levels? You worked on so many different levels. Did you discover something that you need to share with us to understand a little bit more?
Thanks, Kati. Let me start with a question to the audience. Who here knows that we're in the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration? UN Decade, anyone? Okay, good.
These are the change makers.
These are the change makers. So the hashtag for the decade is Generation Restoration, which means that we are, all of us, the generation that is alive today on planet Earth, responsible for repairing Earth at planetary scale, because we need nature for everything. Nature is the basis for our entire economy. Nature is the basis for our spiritual and mental well-being. And I believe that we need a new relationship with nature on an individual level. We need to rediscover that we are part of nature. Nature is us, and we are nature. Now, in my book, I'll just show it here. There's a few copies left in the bookshop, but in the book, I speak about nature as critical infrastructure. Nature is not a luxury that we have and can afford to lose more of. Nature is our most important infrastructure for all of humanity. And for too long, we've taken nature for granted. And if you come back to that idea of a relationship, we're in a relationship with nature, and right now the relationship we're in is abusive. It's an abusive relationship because we take. All of us know of relationships like that. Maybe you've been in a relationship like that, and they always end, and they do not end well. We cannot afford divorce with nature, and we're headed for that right now. So we have to repair our relationship with nature. It's a very personal mission for everybody, but it's also a societal mission. And generation restoration with the UN Decade, where I still sit on the advisory board. It was my last job at UNEP before I joined the private sector to set up that UN Decade. The United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration brings together all these different societal movements. And if you look at all the things that are happening, that's immensely encouraging, from Acción Andina to the things that are happening by the governments. If you, for example, take China, who are understanding that infrastructure level investments in nature are necessary. Brazil is launching the bioeconomy initiative in the G20. So there's an enormous signs of hope everywhere. Let's look for those.
I bring in the business hat on for you. So what is the task then for the private sector and the business sector to do their task for this relationship, you know, because we all need all hands on deck. And I'm not just talking about the policy level or the local communities, then I'm looking also to you with your business hat on. Where do you see the task for the business and private sector?
So Salesforce is a global technology company. It's a $40 billion revenue company per year. We have a lot of environmental commitments and nature positive strategy, including that we launched in 2020 a movement called the Trillion Trees Initiative, which is now called the Forest Future Alliance. So we're trying to bring a lot of other companies together to invest in holistic forest landscape restoration. Our own commitment is to plant 100 million trees by 2030. We're at about 65 million trees now. We're also a large purchaser of nature-based solution carbon credits. Just today it was announced that we have our second offtake agreement for nature-based removal. So these are nature restorations credits through the Symbiosis Coalition with Meta, Microsoft, and Google. We made a commitment 2 years ago to take about 20 million tons off the market and give a big market signal to these restoration projects to also enter the carbon market. But that's not enough. We need investments in water that companies rely on. We need investments in resilient food and supply chains that companies rely on. We have to see nature more as our infrastructure and a critical resilience investment for the private sector.
Laurent, when you were speaking, I'd like to understand one more thing, because you were mentioning also, of course, it has so many layers. A community is not just a community. There are different age groups, different generations. So this really is something that I read out of the Acción Andina as well, which is so crucial to the success. Can you give us a little bit more an insight on what is then the recipe to create this environment that a community can thrive, that multi-generational efforts are greater than just single organizations doing one thing? You know, what was the recipe that you helped also? Because you mentioned restoration is a living system, and with a living system, there are so many different variables, and some variables are often falling down the table, others are holding up. How do you keep the balance at Acción Andina?
Thank you. I think, first of all, one of the core reflections that we have in our work, we speak a lot about the economy, right? It's driving our entire world, our system, and so on. But there's something much, much deeper than that. And to me, it's really about culture. And culture is our collective identity, is whatever bridges generation. Most oftentimes is not the economy. It's actually cultural identity. And what we see from the Andes is nothing new. We work with two major principles that are in the Andes that come from thousands of years of tradition, called Aini and Minca, which is in Quechua, means reciprocity and communal service, something like that at least. And what it allows us to do, so INI, to explain this briefly, INI is reciprocity from one person to another, from one person to a family, or one family to a family, from community to community, but also from community to the living world, right? We have not made that distinction that the West has often did, what Tim referred to, of the separation. And Minka is an consequence of INI, where you, for the greater purpose, come together for greater works. And so the Inca, for example, built the entire empire, fortresses, aqueducts, I mean, real infrastructure, as Tim mentioned, using these principles to bring together thousands of people. And Acción Andina is nothing left than reviving those ancestral principles and putting it for the restoration of nature. So we plant trees. I think we have now planted almost 20 million trees in the Andes, native forest, that will grow over time, right? And they need to be nurtured over decades and decades. We speak of Acción Andina not as a short-term effort. It has to be a 100-year movement, right? Just the Andes, sorry, I'm gonna take you a little bit away from here. The Andes is a 9,000-kilometer mountain range from Venezuela to Patagonia. It's gigantic. It's way bigger than Europe in that sense, right? And so it will take us such a long time. And yes, we today work on a lot of different economic sort of or financial system to make this work, but at the ground level, really what holds the communities together and what brings us today with over 50,000 people day-to-day restoring forest is INI and Minka, is the deep cultural level. And the truth is, it exists in the Andes, but it exists everywhere around the world. And this is what we need to tap into.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Laurent. But the question that comes to my mind, of course, how do we then bridge the ancestral knowledge with modern science, with modern institutions? Because nostalgia is one thing, and that we don't want to, to stay in the past. We really need to work towards the future. So how do we bridge ancestral knowledge and wisdom, in a sense, with modern science, what I mentioned, businesses, economic factors?
I think that's where a key recipe lies, right? And we have partnered very honorably with Salesforce from day one. So you have a movement in the Andes. You have the deep ancestral cultural element that glues this all together. But then when we have 50,000 people involved in a project, you need modern tools and technology to actually make this work. So one of the themes, for example, we partnered on with Salesforce was, okay, how do we coordinate 50,000 people? How do you get any grants down all the way to a community leader? And how do you calculate impact and so on? So there are these bridges that are not mutually exclusive from a capacity perspective, but actually allowing us to bring today's innovation for this good. And I think at the end, it's a matter of, it's a practice, right? It's a mindset of bridging those two worlds. We all know we are deeply inspired, but what indigenous communities still hold on in terms of values, in terms of worldview, right? And at the same time, right, we are fascinated by how technology moves, right? Bringing these two together offers a third sort of path forward. I think that we have to adopt as a practice in our day-to-day, and there is so much innovation potential on that end.
Thank you. Tim, what do you see? You don't see it as a contradiction, I assume, that we have modern technology on one side and the ancestral knowledge on the other side, or do you also see some challenges, or maybe you have some headaches along the way that you can share with us?
Technology is a tool, and we have to always try to use it for a good purpose. I think that's important. We see, of course, a lot of encouraging signals that technologies like AI are also used by NGOs for improving their outreach, their relationship management. But there is, and this is actually the topic of the next panel on responsible AI, but there is, of course, there's a challenge that we can use the best tools, we can use the best arguments, we can have all the right science and the knowledge, but it still comes back to that relationship issue to build a social movement for the scale of change we need now. And that is a deeply interpersonal and a personal mission that many of us, all of us here are on, but many more people can be and must be on to repair our relationship with nature. And I believe that, coming back to the title of the session here, that the Rio Conventions can, of course, do a lot to do that. From a private sector perspective, it does not make sense to have 3 separate conventions to discuss almost the same thing. So not a merger of the legal treaties, but a merger of the Secretariat and the administration certainly would make sense. But it's of course a different perspective now after having worked for the UN for 15 years to see it from the outside. Yeah. But I would really encourage what Laurent Fabius said here, but pull it forward a few years. We can't wait another 4 years for these kinds of mergers and collaborations between the conventions.
This is really a beautiful topic for every Change Now and Evergreen topic on how to merge the COPs, but also, of course, how to include the communities. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your insights, but also a big round of applause to Tim Christopherson and Florent Kaiser for your insights. Stay with me in a second, but of course you can shower our panelists with your round of applause. It needs all hands on deck. Thank you for staying with us for a good 90 minutes. Florent Kaiser, I'd like to finish with one of your quotes. You said restoration is not just an environmental fix, but a deeply human solution, which really brings the human character here back on stage. Thank you, change makers, for being here with us. It's really giving every one of us so much hope in these times that we are surrounded in that area by people who are fighting for the good stuff, by people who are standing up. So really, I can just say it gives hope in these stormy times. Thank you for being with us here at the Agora stage, and stay with us as the next panel is just around the corner when we talk about responsible AI. Merci. Thank you.